Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we're talking with Ramona Ortega. She is the CEO and founder of WealthBuild, an AI-powered financial assistant that helps people make financial decisions. She is also the founder of My Money, My Future, which is a financial literacy platform. Before that, she was one of the founding team of Aslo and was a corporate attorney. She is a political impact leader and was recently featured in HBO's Gaming Wall Street, which is built around the GameStop events. She got her bachelor's at UCLA and her JD at Fordham, and she has a certificate from Columbia. So, Ramona, thank you for being here on the podcast.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. Look forward to this conversation.
Good, good. So, one of the things that I really wanted to ask you about is something that you've already done, I think, which is the possibility of using AI to close a servicing gap in the investment management platforms that is very interesting to me. Which gap did you find, and how are you using AI to close it?
Yes. So we are closing what I have termed as sort of the last gap in financial services. If I can step back for a second, because I actually have been around for a while in Fintech, I would say that there's kind of been three waves, sort of in the third wave. So V1 of Fintech was all about sort of unbundling the bank, if you will, right? So that's when we've seen Acorns, we've seen LearnVest, we've seen a lot of these sort of, new opportunities to sort of take a vertical of the bank or banking, if you will, or sort of traditional financial services and unbundle it. So you had a vertical that would address that and digitize it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of V1. V2 was really focused on access, right? So everybody would talk about people don't have access to banks, people don't have access to financial advisors for investing, right? So then you had the robo-advisor, you had neobanks, right? And you had lots of them. So we had lots of neobanks, lots of robo-advisors. We had the digitization of insurance, right? So it's sort of what I call was the access gap, right? Let's get things online, let's digitize them, let's create a better consumer experience in financial services and get greater access. So we kind of did that, right? If you think about it now, almost every financial service that a consumer may want to access is available technically, right? So insurance, investing, brokerage accounts with Robinhood, right? So all of those verticals are now accessible.
Sure.
What I have always said, and I'm coming to this from the perspective of a not high net worth individual, right? So I call it 99%.
Right.
What most people are looking for is advice. They're like, tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Right? Tell me what to do. And then I can even maybe go find the product. But what should I be doing? How do I get started investing? I'm 35 and I only have one 401k and I haven't really paid attention to it. What do I do? I have a job and I'm leaving my job to start my own business. What should I do?
Mm-hmm.
I just got married. What should I do? Right? There's all of these sort of what should I do and how should I do it? And I call that the financial advice gap. And I think that is the largest sort of opportunity in financial services. And that's what WealthBuild is going after.
Okay.
And the reason that's been obviously complicated is that financial advice, most people immediately think of sort of advice around your portfolio.
Right.
And I will make that very clear. That's not what we're trying to necessarily do. We will partner with people to do the financial advice around someone's specific portfolio because that's a regulated space.
Mm-hmm.
Think of us as sort of what are the best answers if someone goes on, for example, a nerd wallet, right? Or they're going to look for this information and then they're kind of left to make the decision themselves. We're going to help them make that decision around a financial product.
Right. This is the space that I sort of identify somewhere between budgeting and financial planning. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I think it encompasses so much more though, Rob. And I think that's the important piece here. When I talk to someone maybe in their, let's say in their 30s, and they're sort of, I said, tell me about your financial life. We're talking about so many different financial events or decisions that they might have to make that don't have to do with necessarily even just cash management. And I couldn't consider budgeting and debt reduction as part of like kind of cash management. We're talking about, I just had a kid, or maybe I have two kids and I just got married. Well, let's talk about life insurance.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about an estate plan. I have to take care of my parents. I'm looking to buy a second house. I want to leave my job. Have you rolled over your investments? Sort of, do you have an alternative investment besides a 401k? Do you have a Roth? Do you have, what are these
Yeah.
other products?
The college
And a
savings
lot of
plan.
it's
Yeah.
just, yeah. And you can imagine that when you have conversations with people about their personal financial lives, you will get clarity on a lot of things that they may not even be thinking about. And so I always say that if I was talking to my friends about their financial lives, that's what we're trying to replicate using AI. And I think that is, for me, the driver is that this is actually the opportunity to do so. We now, from a technology point of view, have the skills, we have the technology, we have the mechanisms to make this a reality.
Well, and this brings us to one of the issues that I think several speakers at CFA New York events recently have been skeptical about within the changes. I wouldn't call it an AI revolution, but changes that AI are bringing, is that there are some issues with AI replicating the work that investment management professionals do. First, because a user of AI doesn't necessarily understand the data sources that the AI is using to make those decisions. And secondly, there is this issue that's really gaining steam and mostly in academic corners about how the individuals who build the model are also subconsciously inserting their biases into it. So, what do you say about that?
I have a couple of things to say about that. Well, let me start with the non-technical piece first, which is bias is always inserted into financial conversations. Financial advisors are biased,
Right,
even if
right.
they don't think they are. I mean, one of the reasons I started My Money, My Future was when I looked around and I was thinking about, so it was early in my legal career for a financial advisor. I felt like the people that I was speaking to didn't understand my financial situation. They didn't understand my historical situation. They didn't understand me culturally. I mean, we're talking about sort of, I have maybe extended family that I have to take care of. And I think that is not unlike many communities of color, for example. So I think certified financial planners, so women and minorities make up a very small percentage, right? And while the facts of financial advice might be the same, the context is very different,
Hmm.
right? And so there's bias already there, right? And
Hmm.
so, and then the other thing is that, we're, especially for the segment that we're reaching, they're not necessarily going to be going to a financial advisor. We are literally the front door to the financial services,
Right.
right? So we're actually creating a whole new sort of demographic and clients and opportunities for people, because we're expanding the pool of people that actually might end up going to a financial advisor, right? And there's still going to be a lot of need for that. And then the other thing is that as people understand that most people that we're talking about, this sort of demographic of young folks or millennials even, they're getting their information right now from TikTok, Instagram, and blog posts.
Right.
So I think we can do a little bit better than that.
Yes. I agree.
So my thing, right? So what I think what we're trying to do is, hey, there's a lot of people out there that are hungry for this information, but they don't feel comfortable in the traditional financial services sector.
Right.
That
Exactly.
sector is not going to be moving onto TikTok anytime soon. And that, I
Right.
don't even think that's the sort of right answer, right?
Right.
What they're looking for is that sort of someone to turn to for trusted financial advice. We want to be that service for them, that platform. And so now let me talk to you about sort of the technology behind what we're using, which is RAG, retrieval augmented generation AI systems.
Yeah. Yeah. Please.
And
This,
this is,
I really want to get into this actually. This is the nuts and bolts
yeah,
of it that I think is really interesting.
this is
Yeah.
the fun part. And by the way, I think, you heard it here first if you haven't heard of it, but this is what everyone's going to be starting to focus on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
People just came out of the generative AI, like, woohoo, ChatGPT.
Right.
And so remember, ChatGPT is a LLM, a large language
Yes.
model.
Yep.
It is trained on billions of data points. There's
Hmm.
not, and then what we call that a foundational model.
Right.
So I think when you say people are concerned with how this thing has been trained, I would say they're concerned with how the foundational model has been trained, right?
Right.
We don't
Right.
read most people, and if they're saying they're doing AI, most I mean, besides the big companies, they're not necessarily creating their own foundational model, right? So Bloomberg has its own internal, which makes sense. They have tons of data to do that with, right? ChatGPT and OpenAI has a foundational model. Meta has a foundational model. There's others, Cohere.
Yep.
We're not building those, but we're also not relying on those. And that is the key thing. So retrieval augmented generative AI or generation AI is essentially taking a question that someone is asking and then retrieving that information from a proprietary knowledge base.
Right.
So we have created essentially a proprietary knowledge base that allows us to get around the challenges of traditional generative AI, which are one, it's generative, which means it's going to try to create an answer, and that creates hallucination. We don't want hallucinations in financial services, right? Two, it's not updated, right? So it's based on a 2021 model, as you know, rules and
it's one time. Yeah,
it's a one-time thing. And that means to retrain a model, a foundational model, takes a long time and a lot of energy. Most companies are not going to be doing that. With a retrieval model, what you're using is sort of a vectorization. So it basically looks at your database. It's taking information that is, so for example, if you ask a question about a Roth IRA, it looks through our proprietary database of documents, of PDFs, whatever it may be, and then it creates a vector, kind of like a 0, 1, if you will.
Right.
And then it searches that. Those documents, we can both update them. They're proprietary, so I can actually write them, for example, in a language that I think is fitting for our chat bot, right? So there's a lot of things I can do inside of that document. It's as if, for example, you have a Google folder with all of your finances, and you're like, and you want to then interact with all of that information in there.
Okay.
That's essentially what we're doing. And we're creating a sort of a financial assistant, a bot, to go in there and to search it, to look at it, and to put it together and give you the best answer. So we use a couple of different verticals. The RAG model, again, really big. And by the way, this is you're going to hear about it more, because this is how enterprise companies are going to be using this data. Because, I mean, you can imagine even your own organization has tons of documents and data sources, right? You have internal documents, you have chats, you have podcasts. I mean, you have tons of internal documents. If you all wanted to create a chatbot that interacts with that information, you could use the RAG model to do that. And that's what we're doing, right? So you're going to see that a lot more because of the two things I just talked about, which is it's a way to circumvent the hallucinations,
right,
and to ensure the accuracy and updating of that information. Because when I update a document, so, and we know, look, things like the IRS rules change all the time.
Sure.
That's going to need to be updated. It's not going to take as long or as much energy to retrain the model, because it's essentially only looking for the information that the user has input.
Right.
So it creates a lot of opportunity for you to really personalize or to create proprietary data sets. So you don't get, right, sure, there's some bias, I suppose, in the context of which we're doing it, but what we're doing is essentially taking sort of factual knowledge, putting it together so that it's both updated and it's sort of given in a way that we think our users are essentially going to be asking and querying that data. And then importantly too, and we don't talk about this enough, but I think you will start hearing more about it, the dialogue management. When you talk to ChatGPT, you're asking it questions. It is not asking you questions.
Right. It doesn't ask you follow-up questions.
Answer. Right. The generative part is assuming it's going to make a calculated guess of what you're going to ask next, or what the answer should be. What we're using is a method to actually create conversations that will either ask you questions beforehand, before it gives you a answer. And it's a multi-turn conversation, right? Because when financial advisors sit down with someone, they're not sitting there saying, ask me a question and I'll answer it.
Right.
They're
It's
asking
like,
you
yeah,
questions.
you have questions
Right,
about mutual funds or whatever. Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
They're going to ask you some questions first, or they're going to ask you follow-up questions. And I think the perfect example of this is, and this is a question we get all the time, especially from, the 28 to 35, is how do I start investing?
Right.
Well,
Right.
which kind of investing are you talking? Do you own a home? You're already an investor.
Yeah, you're a real
Do
estate
you have a
investor and
401k?
100% allocated to it. Yeah.
Exactly. You have all your eggs in one basket. So let's talk about portfolio
Yeah.
diversification.
Yeah.
But, or someone who already has a 401k, and I still get this all the time. They have a 401k, but they're asking about a brokerage account because, of course, everybody, I think there's a sort of, I want to buy my own stocks. I want
Right. They
to,
want to direct. Yeah. Yeah.
right. And that's a different question. So I think that's where the dialogue management aspect of a chatbot comes into play. And that's what we don't see in a chat GPT. I think that we're getting there. I think we're going to start to see more tooling around this. So we use about 3 different tools actually to make this happen on the back end. So we do use chat GPT for the language model, so essentially to help us create a conversational dialogue.
Right.
We
With the
do use
comprehension part of
chat
it. Yeah.
GPT. So
Hmm.
it's essentially, it says, so you ask a question, it goes and looks at our database, finds up the best answer, but it processes it through that LLM model. And then it offers an answer based on our dialogue management cues.
Right. So from a business perspective, one of the things that I was wondering about this is, so I don't have so many of those here, but back when I was an analyst, I had to watch these videos telling me what not to do every 6 or 8 weeks. You don't really have to do that with the model, right? It stays in the lane, right? You don't have to worry about it saying something that it shouldn't.
That's right. And I think, and that's the problem with sort of just straight chat GPT, is that it's going to, and I've played with it obviously extensively. It might even give me the right answer up front. But what happens is that the more I ask it questions, it starts to degenerate, if you will. It kind of starts hallucinating answers. And I think that's where the problems come in.
Right.
And especially if something's been updated in the last year or so, which obviously a lot of IRS, a lot of 401k rules, Roth IRA, like a bunch of things that are regulated. And that's the other reason that we want to make sure we have some rails around it, is that it's a fine line between regulatory advice and guidance. We consider
Right.
ourselves as guidance, not advice.
Right. And that's a very difficult line to walk on. I understand the difficulty of that, as we're not a registered investment advisor either. But boy, we sure have a playground for a lot of different kinds of information here. I guess, this is exceptionally interesting from a couple of ways that you think about the risk to an investment management firm, not just from the issues of compliance or the ease of compliance, but also the expense of compliance, which is seems to get bigger every year. I'd like to just, turn a little bit towards because you have a rare perch. You've been around this space, which is for its entirety. And so I wonder, for generally, what do you think the risks in the industry, for the financial services industry, might be in AI?
I think, they're not the risks that I think that everyone else thinks they are, right?
Yeah,
So
that's why this is interesting,
yeah,
right?
it reminds me of kind of early fintech, when people were like, oh, there's not going to be any more banks because everyone's going to flock to a neobank,
Right.
or there's not going to be, robo advisors are going I mean, I think robo advisors was more of a risk in some ways to the more traditional financial advisors. And you've seen, I think what we're going to end up is sort of this merging of these technologies. People are still going to go to financial service providers, more traditional. They're going to still get financial advice. In fact, our model is one where the subscription at a certain tier will allow you to have a fractional share of a certified financial planner,
Okay.
because there are things that people still want to talk to someone. And sometimes people just want, that sort of human voice, that human interaction at the other end. What we think about is we're really solving for that onboarding, that front door to traditional financial services, because we're going after, again, a segment, and I think this is increasingly becoming true, is that, look, I mean, we're at a demographic change now. And so you get a lot of people who've never really dealt with financial services. They think Venmo is a bank, right? So, you know, this is a way to onboard them into more traditional things that they may in fact need.
Right. This segment is also very interesting to me. One, because they grew up in a time when a lot of their experience or their understanding as children of banks was delivered to them through the media, which contained a lot of information about the fraud that started in 2005, 6, 7, 8, and went on from there. And still kind of reverberates through the media every once in a while now. CFA New York's book club is actually reading a book about Wirecard right now.
Exactly. Look, I think, and especially in communities of color where you've had a history of sort of some institutionalized discrimination with redlining,
Yep.
loans with banks,
Yep.
right? We know that there's been many, many studies. This is not me making stuff up around
No.
sort of discrimination in loans and mortgages and excessive credit card rates. So you have a lot of sort of, let's say, distrust of traditional financial services. And I think, unfortunately, financial advisors are kind of thrown in there. And the other thing is that we also are faced with a lot of this generation, a younger generation, does not have the same amount of wealth due to student loan debt, right? So, I mean, we talk to people all the time. They may be making over $100,000, but they feel like they don't have enough money to see a financial advisor because they may be, in fact, living kind of, as if they were making half of that because of debt.
Because they are. Right. Yeah. Because they have to service it. So, yeah. So it comes out just after taxes.
Exactly. And the cost of living has gone up. We know that wages haven't risen at the same rate as
Oh, sure.
inflation.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Mhm.
there's a lot of reasons for that. But I think back to your question around, is this a risk? I think that there's going to be efficiencies brought about by AI in the market. So you might see a reduction, for example, in a staffing in some areas that can actually be done. And I think those are actually more internal. So you're using AI for infrastructure, you're going to see a lot more of that.
Okay.
I see consumer facing financial services tools being integrated. Like we would love to work with a Fidelity, for example, because there's so many opportunities there to ensure that people, in fact, have access to tools and information to make the right decisions. We have a story of a young woman who's a financial professional, worked at one of these big institutions, and she said when she rolled over her 401k, she didn't realize that she had to allocate it. So
Oh,
she literally
yeah.
sat there in a money market account.
Yeah.
Now, this is someone that worked at one of these big financial
Right.
institutions. Obviously not, it's not a matter of, oh, she's not financially savvy, but like people, where are you getting this information, right? If you don't learn about financial sort of literacy at home, or you're not learning about it at school,
Right.
you
That's
just
for sure.
not,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Not mandated. So
Mm.
you're kind of learning by making all of these mistakes. And I think that was the genesis for my first company, My Money, My Future, was like, people need to understand the fundamentals because we're making all these mistakes that are costing people, hundreds and thousands of dollars over their lifetime because no one's teaching you this really fundamental basic stuff outside of budgeting, right? And it's not just about savings. It's about sort of how do you build wealth over your lifetime? There's a lot of different tools and products that you need to do that.
Right. And and this is one of the things that I think a lot of the I'm concerned that a lot of people are missing out on right now is one of the biggest benefits, and the reason this podcast is named Compound Insights is because compounding is the most powerful tool of all.
Right.
And you can't do that without time.
Exactly. The way I always talk to folks about it is, it's not how much you invest, it's how long you invest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's yeah, and and this is the difficulty is the entire 401k benefit scheme is kind of aimed at that. But if you
Right.
don't have the time, how can you take advantage of those things?
Right. Or not understanding portfolio diversification. right? And I think the jargon in financial services is part of the problem, which is why I think, when even when we're as we build our AI and the tone of our chatbot, like even that is something that we're really fine tuning to make sure that people feel welcomed. And I think one of the interesting benefits of this is that people don't realize a lot of people feel embarrassed to ask questions to a financial advisor.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's something that's I think is completely underestimated. We do a lot of work around financial literacy and asking people, sort of what's the sort of how do you identify as an investor? And one of the main things is like, I don't, and it's because I don't do X, Y, and Z. And so giving them the opportunity to ask questions to be more informed is really, really important for them to take action.
Right.
And so, it's really nice, this opportunity for me to bring in my experience as My Money, My Future, and the work that we're doing with the NASDAQ Foundation. We're doing a whole campaign called Thrive around investor education, in particular in communities of color. And that's sort of, I think, always the first step. So we like to think about the way that we're using AI is to build in the education in the conversation.
Well, you couldn't actually do a better signpost for CFA New York's overall philanthropic goal either. Right? That is why we're a nonprofit organization. So, we can't necessarily help you with that, but boy, we can sure cheer for you. um, but thank you, Ramona. This is a very uplifting conversation. It's very helpful for a lot of members to hear also. And I think Ramona was not overstating it. I think this is an exceptionally interesting implementation of AI to think about for your firms. So thank you again. And thank you to you all for listening. If you are downloading this podcast and you are not a member, or you are a member and you haven't yet renewed your membership, please do so now at cfany.org. Until next time, I'm Rob Rowan.